So next up is a conversation that I've been looking forward to since the first day we began to conceptualize the AI Symposium. I'm pleased to introduce Gillian Tett, who probably needs no introduction. She's a columnist and editorial board member for the Financial Times. She's joining us virtually to have a conversation with former US Treasury Secretary Larry Summers. I had the good fortune of working for Larry Summers at the Treasury Department. Secretary Summers, after working at the Treasury Department, has held a number of esteemed positions in public policy and academia. Larry was the National Economic Council Director under President Obama, and he currently serves as the Charles W. Eliot University Professor and President Emeritus at Harvard University. And many of you know, Larry joined the board of OpenAI last year. This conversation is going to be fantastic and really important as we think about the future directions of artificial intelligence. And we're so honored to have both of you, Gillian and Secretary Summers, joining us. Thank you both.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I'm over in the UK right now because I'm acting also, overseeing King's College in Cambridge, which is, of course, where Alan Turing first developed his concepts of AI. And I can't think of a better person right now to be talking to about all this than Larry Summers, who has seen both the American economy and the global economy in all its glory and horror, but is now, of course, immersed in the world of AI as well. So I'd like to start by asking you, Secretary Summers, you've said in the past that you think that AI, or rather the invention of AI, is as important as the invention of electricity. Why?
So, Gillian, thank you very much. And Melissa, thank you very, very much for having me. And whenever anybody in any interview calls me Secretary Summers, I know I'm in for a rough and challenging ride. And I already knew that when I knew that Gillian was going to be doing this interview. Look, here are a few things to know about fundamental innovations. First, the economic history of the world in 60 seconds is that it was all Malthus and no growth until ancient Athens. It was growth in the few basis points a year for centuries after that. Then it became tens of basis points. Then it became percentage points after the Industrial Revolution. So growth has accelerated with successful, fundamental, transformative, general purpose technologies. Observation one, that can happen again. No reason to think the Industrial Revolution was the last time it would happen. Observation two, artificial intelligence stands out for this recursive aspect. Electricity does not improve electricity. Fire does not improve fire. Artificial intelligence past a certain point has the capability to make and develop better, faster, more efficient artificial intelligence in more efficient ways. Third, it is the accepted wisdom among economists that if you want to understand economic growth, that a quarter of it is a combination, is increased capital defined broadly, and the other 3/4 of it is increased knowledge defined broadly that permits a given amount of capital and a given amount of labor to produce more output. So a self-improving source of the most important input to productivity stands to reason to be a profoundly transformative change in society. And while I don't make predictions about the timescale and believe there's a general law that things take longer to happen than you think they will, and then happen faster than you thought they could, I'm acutely aware that when there are new technologies, they tend to have as their ultimate use things that were not conceived when they were first conceived. So when the movie camera was first invented, people's idea was that it would be great because you could put it in the back of a theater and film plays. And then people found vastly better uses for it. AT&T famously estimated a market of less than 1 million for phone devices that you could carry. And nobody conceived until really very recently that they could be a substitute for cameras. The original concept of the use of the mainframe was that there might be 7 of them worldwide. There were questions as to about why did the typical person need to even think about having a computer on their desk. So I think that what we know is that tremendous capacities have a way of finding tremendous and pervasive application sooner or later. And I think it's the preponderance of probability that that will be the case with respect to artificial intelligence. My guess is, last thing I'll say here is that when historians write about the late first quarter or early second quarter of the 21st century, stuff about Russia and Ukraine, stuff about the Middle East, even stuff about a populist surge in governance around the world will be stories that are secondary relative to the beginnings of the technological change that was transformational for this epoch in economic history.
Well, I certainly hope that you're right. I think we probably all hope that. But there has, of course, been that little thing called the American election that's just taken place. So I'm curious, if you suddenly had the chance to address Congress or the new incoming president, what would you tell them should be the top priorities in the first 100 days in relation to AI? What do you want them to do, and what do you want them to not do?
I would tell them that there is probably no issue that is more important for US national security than the maintenance of leadership by the United States in the national security, in the AI area around the world. And that leadership relied on the United States having a robust group of national champion companies carrying out tasks in various aspects of the space. I would remind them of the Clinton administration's successful approach to internet policy, an approach that came from a rather surprising source, Ira Magaziner, whose approach to healthcare involved being dirigiste on almost every dimension, had as his next assignment the internet, and adopted much more permissive frameworks. I would take that conversation to a very broad theme, sort of a Philip Howard theme. We need to be able to build, baby, build in the United States, site data centers, site transmission of electricity, site generation, and we just need to be able to get on with it. I would also stress that these are potentially complex and risky technologies, and that the government needs to, less by law than by moral force, establish close connections where real experts within government, both on the national security side and outside the national security side, are closely monitoring and following developments to be attentive to risks of various kinds that might be coming from these technologies, particularly risks that came from the dissemination of the capacity to do damage, the dissemination of the technologies to those who do not wish to do us well. And those national security related challenges would be the ones I would be primarily focused on. But I would also be aware of the need to be attentive on issues related to cybersecurity, very broadly defined. And I would want to make sure that I was gaining, as the government, an understanding of issues relating to privacy and the excessive flow of information, issues relating as it affected individual sectors. But I believe that if the story is told 30 years from now in a way that is not a happy story, I think it is more likely to do with failures of omission and forward motion on the side of the United States and American institutions than it is a story of excessive actions that were taken because of a lack of inhibition.
So do you think that the next administration will take that approach? And do you regard the influence of Elon Musk, who has his own AI company, as positive or negative in terms of their policy making ability?
First I should say that I am speaking for myself here, and that I am not speaking for OpenAI. Second, Gillian, I try to resort to this only rarely, but from time to time there are questions that are just too hard to give a simple answer to. If you ask me, is like rain good for New England? The answer is, yeah, rain's good for New England, but too much rain's bad for New England. And when it rains on Memorial Day or July 4th, that's really sad and it's really bad. So it's hard to have a on balance positive or negative judgment about the phenomenon of rain. And I kind of feel the same way about the phenomenon of Elon Musk. It is an extraordinary thing that the contribution of Elon Musk to having Americans in space and Americans able to use space dwarfs that of NASA, even making adjustments for the fact that Elon has in some ways been able to build on NASA. The energy and the capacity he has brought to the production of other technologies, electric vehicles, has been a stunning thing. Has his every political and cultural attitude accorded with my concept of the national interest? I have to say no. Do I think that a prudent government has to find a very difficult balance between drawing on the wisdom, experience, and effectiveness of the private sector and being co-opted by the private sector. That's the balance that has to be struck. Am I completely confident that that's going to be struck in a healthy way by the incoming administration based on everything I've seen over the last 2 or 3 weeks? No, I can't say that I have. I have that confidence, but I think it's a very difficult set of balances, and we will have to wait and see. When people ask me about this, Gillian, I am reminded of how Donald Trump first came to public prominence. When the city of New York could not, he managed to get the Central Park skating rink fixed and operational and working. Well, was that a good thing or a bad thing? There were a lot of public employees who were hoping to do that in a very expensive way, but hadn't done it, who were very unhappy that happened. I think most skaters in New York were kind of glad that that happened. I think it set in motion some pressures towards doing away with fair commercial practice around building in New York that were probably problematic. And so I think this is something we need to approach with very considerable care and caution. I have read a certain amount about the people who drove the industrial renaissance that won us World War II through the production of planes and tanks and ships, of the people who drove the construction of some of our great cities. They weren't people whose tendency was to be enormously patient with bean counting regulators asking them to fill out forms. So I think the right answer involves some striking of a balance, and I'm watching with fascination and considerable alarm, but also with an awareness that the kind of energy that has been brought to certain hugely important projects is something that, in some very important respects, our country needs.
Well, thank you. Having once had the joy of editing some of your columns for the Financial Times, I don't think I've ever heard you hedge your bets quite so much, but there we go. Nor have I heard Elon Musk likened to rain, but it's probably quite a good metaphor. The financial sector is one area where AI adoption is already underway and where many people think there could be extraordinary potential. As someone who oversaw the Asian financial crisis from your position at Treasury and has seen other financial crises develop, how concerned are you that the introduction of AI might actually create new financial system risks? Or do you think we should not be worrying and simply embrace all the efficiencies that AI can potentially bring with it?
Gillian, the answer to all questions of the forum, should you worry, is yes. So anytime I'm asked, should we be worried about X, the answer as a prudent policymaker is always yes. And certainly the answer as an expert being interviewed is yes, because if you say yes and the problem doesn't happen, then thank God you were worrying about it so it wouldn't happen. And if it does happen, then you were prescient. Whereas if you say no and the problem does happen, then you were dead wrong. And it's like when Irving Fisher said we were on a permanent plateau of prosperity in 1929. So yes, the answer is right to be worried. As a general matter, with respect to financial crisis, I think we substantially overestimate technology and new modes of trading, lending, investing, financing as a cause of financial crisis. And we give too little weight to fairly traditional modes of finance being taken to excess with too little scrutiny. So if I ask myself, what is the cumulative loss to the world economy from excessively leveraged real estate being bid up in price and then being collapsing in value, leaving the relevant debt securities underwater? That loss seems immense to me relative to losses associated with new kinds of derivatives or high-speed trading or efflorescences of technology. So I think that the right focus for us in financial regulation is the solvency and liquidity of financial institutions, is the proper evaluation on a continuous basis of collateral, is finding more dynamic approaches to regulation that are at least a tenth as fast as the markets are in terms of replenishing capital and liquidity, rather than focusing on new techniques of finance that I think are usually not the problem. You know, the most recent bits of financial drama in the United States involved SVB, Silicon Valley Bank. And that was a classic case of borrow long with borrow short term with insecure funding to hold long term assets, duration mismatch, not mark the assets to market. So not understanding what the asset position was, not adjust capital, and then have a run. And the regulators were at that point identifying 35 deficiencies about this, that, and the other thing. And I'm fearful that the regulatory response to AI will involve government bureaucrats asking for checks on the way the AI system functions and questions about whether it has algorithmic bias and whatnot. And I think what we need to keep our eye on in financial regulation is up-to-date assessments of capital and liquidity based on realistic assessments of where markets are. And that if we have that, that will offer us the best opportunities for secured finance. In general, I think regulation should be focused on issues rather than technologies. In retrospect, it probably would have been better. It almost certainly would have been better if the United States had had one regulator regulating the stock market and the stock market futures market and the bond market and the bond market options market, and with concerns about manipulation, concerns about integrity, all the concerns about the health of the participants, concerns about consumer protection, rather than have a technique, futures, versus another technique, spot market, be the axis of jurisdiction. And so I am quite skeptical of having some kind of AI regulatory authority that's supposed to think about AI and airplane safety and also think about AI and options trading, rather than approaches that seek to make sure those who regulate options trading and those who regulate AI safety are both incorporating the awareness of AI and the changes brought about AI in setting their paradigms.
Right, right. Well, thank you. Well, sadly, very, very sadly, I think we are almost out of time here. The key points that I take away from what you've said is that Firstly, you are very excited about AI and you think it really does have the chance to unleash a huge productivity boon for America and elsewhere. Secondly, that you think that it's critical that regulators realize the importance of getting out the way, but also being aware of national security questions and wider systemic questions as well. But the danger is that they'll be too cautious and clamp down on innovation rather than unleash innovation and get out the way. Thirdly, you think there clearly should be a big rethink of how the regulatory response is actually being coordinated and managed at the moment. And last but not least, I guess, as I said, I've never heard Elon Musk likened to rain, but it's a rather good image for the fact that you can sometimes have, too much energy, too much haste, too much essentially mold breaking, but you do need that to push ahead in the future. Is that a fair summary, Larry? Is there anything I've missed out, Professor Summers?
I think it's, I always like to choose my words rather than someone else's words, but I think that was a characteristically crisp and accurate summary. I would emphasize also the enabling aspects of AI. I think that we have lived in a country where, for example, it has been much, much too hard to put in place electricity transmission lines. And there are a set of issues that are not AI specific, but are get things done in America issues that I think are important to take advantage of if we're going to take full advantage of AI. I also think it's going to be important for each sector to reflect on how it is going to make use of AI. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it in the context of my classes. Is it cheating if one of my students uses AI? Is it cheating if they use AI as a kind of more efficient Wikipedia? Is it cheating if they use Wikipedia as a kind of more efficient source of survey articles? How does one guide people to use superior technologies in ways that provide a platform for greater achievement rather than a lazy man's guide to achieving the same kind of achievement? And I think those kinds of reflections are going to be important in every area. As last thing I'll say, I am a bit of a lean forward on technology kind of person. I am told that people who are in the area believe that a autonomous vehicle will have to have a chance of getting in an accident that's less than 10% of that of a human driver before autonomous vehicles will be accepted, because people just hate an accident that involves an autonomous vehicle much more than they hate an accident that is caused by a driver. Famously, the last major plane crash in the United States, a Korean Airlines crash in San Francisco, happened because it was a nice day and the pilot decided to turn off the automatic landing system and do it himself. And that was the cause of that accident. So obviously we need to be very careful, but I think we need to also not overly discriminate against the use of technology when the expected outcomes are better.
One way of saying that is that humans, AI can make mistakes, but humans can make mistakes too. The difference is that AI robots can't go on demonstrations and campaign or sit in a law court yet. But anyway, I have no doubt that as we look at these huge existential and very challenging, very real policy issues, that you will be lending your voice to the debate as we go forward. So it just remains to me to say a very big thank you to you, Larry, Professor Summers, Secretary Summers. Thank you for your time. And I look forward enormously to seeing what you're going to be doing on the new board of AI, for the Open AI, for the benefit of us all. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Gillian. Thank you, Secretary Summers. It's been a real pleasure to hear both of you. We hope you were able to tune in later for the rest of the conversations that we have on tap.